What is the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? Story 1. I got chased down by the neighborhood delinquent teenager with a gun when I was walking home from the bus stop with friends. I was 10 years old. My friends were 10 and 11 years old too. We ran to a house for help. A middle-aged woman answered and refused to let us in or help us. She said it could be a prank. We told her it was not, but she was convinced we were trying to get in her house and rob her. We ran farther to my friend's house. Her mom happened to be off work early and was home. She called the police. I got to ride in a police car and watch 2 police officers take down this 17-year-old into the pavement. Story 2. I was investigating a fire for an insurance company in a fourplex in North St. Louis. North St. Louis is a very bad area. It was clearly arson. I had 5 separate, unconnected fires. I had been there for a while, taking photos and doing my work. I was drawing my diagram in the building when I heard 2 guys walking by the building on the other side of the wall. I strained to hear what they were saying since it could be important to my investigation. The 2 guys got to the rear of the building where the fire department had ripped out the wall to be able to extinguish hot spots they had found. I could clearly see them both standing there talking. They started to kick through the debris on the ground, and one started saying how some woman had reported his buddy for setting this fire. He started telling the other guy about how he was going to deal with her and pulled a pistol out of his waistband. At this point, I was frozen in fear, hoping they would not look 90 degrees and see me standing there. So I crouched down as low as I could without making noise and waited. They continued to talk about how it was unfair she told the police on him and kept going. Finally, a car drove by, and I used the sound of it to get out of the house through the front door. Unfortunately, it was not very quiet since most of the floor had collapsed, and I was wearing fire boots. I got to my truck across the street. I was sitting in the driver's seat trying to calm myself when the guy with the gun walked around the side of the house to the front porch, sat down, and aimed it at me. I turned the truck on and drove out of there. I ended up going back about an hour later to see if they were gone because I had to finish my scene. It is still one of the top 5 scariest moments of my career so far. Story 3. I was at a sleepover at my friend's place. We decided to sneak out and wander around aimlessly. We stopped at our school, which had a small patch of trees on the grounds where the older kids hung out during lunch. There were rumors of a large magazine collection there, hence our visit. While there, my friend stepped off to the side to use the bathroom. A few seconds later, he came rushing back and said, "Run." I did not know what his deal was, but as a kid in the forest, with only the light of the moon, I figured asking questions was a secondary option to being left alone there. We ran until we could not run anymore. Finally, my friend explained that there was a strange man watching him. He said that he believed the guy was acting in a disturbing way. Being kids with a history of pranks, I thought he was messing with me. Then I looked back and saw the man a long way back, but moving in our direction. We kept running towards my friend's place and he kept following. When we got back, we thought we lost him. We snuck back inside and turned off all of the lights in the basement. We lay there silently and terrified. About 10 minutes later, we saw something move by the window. We knew someone was out there. We stayed completely still and quiet. A minute later, we heard a noise coming from a room in the basement. We both panicked and started yelling for my friend's dad. He came running down the stairs and we were yelling that someone was in that room. His dad flung open the door and the window was open, and there were fresh marks on the wall from someone climbing in or out. For some reason, he did not call the police. He decided to stay downstairs with us for the night. I did not really sleep, and in the morning my friend's dad made me walk home with him. A few blocks away, there were a bunch of police. As we walked by, one of the officers stopped us and asked if we saw anything suspicious last night. We told him the story, which started further questioning. It turned out that a kid went missing from his room right around the same time that we got chased home. They found the man a few days later dead from suicide. They never found the boy he abducted. We had a lot of trouble with that. My friend's dad felt guilty for not calling the police. He became addicted to sleeping pills. My friend was traumatized with just how close he came to being grabbed in the forest. He turned to drugs really young and eventually passed away. I went through therapy for a while and still have occasional night terrors from that night, even though it happened almost 30 years ago. Story 4. Once, while spending time with friends in a graveyard at about 16 or 17 years old, my friend's little brother was suddenly accosted by an absolute giant of a man and 2 of his cronies. We had seen them coming but did not expect any violence. He grabbed my friend's brother in a headlock and said, "We are going to go shave his head." I will add that we were all the typical long-haired, black denim and band t-shirt wearing types, and getting verbally and occasionally physically abused was fairly common. Thinking that they were probably joking to a degree, I pulled my friend out of the hold. The next thing I knew, I was being punched in the face by a man a solid foot taller than me, a decade older, and with strength and reach that I could not possibly compete with. I spent a lot of my childhood being beaten by adults, but by this point I thought I had got through that part of my life. He held me by my neck and kept punching me until I hit the ground. By this point, my group of friends were doing all they could to stop him, but he was swatting them away like flies, and one called the police. Once I was on the ground, he kicked me in the head 11 times in all. I had heard he was wearing steel-toed boots, but I am not entirely sure if that is true. He just would not stop throwing everything he had at my head. The last kick was under the chin, and everyone heard a massive crunch. It was enough to make my attacker stop and run away. Thankfully, it was not my neck, but I had 7 of my teeth shattered while also biting through the edges of my tongue. I was left with a damaged eye, ear, memory, and spine. I still get strange headaches from that time, but I got off lucky. Because I do not bruise easily, the hospital dismissed me upon arrival, and I then had to give a statement. And over time, many of the more frustrating issues became apparent. They caught the man, and he had to pay me £120 towards dental bills, but most importantly, my friends were all fine. I had been getting beaten up by people for years, so I was glad it was me and not them. I have no idea why he seemed so determined to almost kill me. He died a couple of years later, good riddance. Story 5. I was up in my 3rd floor bedroom, having just smoked and listening to music with my headphones on, when I started to hear strange noises. Naturally, I thought it was because I was under the influence, but it was weird enough for me to take my headphones off. I listened for a bit, and coming from downstairs was a creepy voice I did not recognize mixed with John's, my housemate's, voice, but he sounded like he was in pain. I was confused, so I started walking slowly down the stairs and looked into his room where I saw John on the floor holding his eyes in pain, while a large man in a hoodie was shouting at him and grabbing things off the shelves. The next thing I knew, my instincts had taken over, and I ran toward the room. The hooded man turned and ran out the door when I smashed into him, and we both went tumbling down the staircase, exchanging punches on the way down. We scuffled a bit in the hallway until he eventually ran out the door. It turned out that John, who at that time was on crutches, had been hobbling home and went to open our front door when the hooded man came up behind him and sprayed him in the face with pepper spray, blinding him. He then forced him up to his bedroom to rob him and take his belongings. The poor guy had to wear iPads for the next 2 days. In the end, John was okay, but it was a terrifying situation. Honestly, I was so stoned that it did not even feel real at the time. It was like a bad trip. We all moved out 2 weeks later. It happened in Brixton, London. Story 6. My cousin, who was about 14 years old, was babysitting us, 9-year-old me and my 4-year-old brother, when her dad called coming down from what I assume was some very serious substance use. He screamed at her over the phone, demanding to know where her piggy bank was. She told him to leave her alone and hung up. He called back. She did not pick up, and he left a voice message which played as he was leaving it, saying that he was going to come down there and murder all of us with a knife, that he was going to kill us all. He was full of empty threats, but we were terrified. Can you imagine the pure fear a 9-year-old feels when a grown man who sounds unhinged says he is going to kill her with a knife? So we prepared. We blocked out the windows, locked everything, and put heavy furniture in front of the doors. My brother was asleep in his room, and my cousin told me to just leave him, but I could not stand the thought of him being alone in there, so I crawled quietly, heart beating out of my chest, across the kitchen, through the living room to his room, scooped him up, and brought him back to my mom's room, which we then barricaded ourselves into. I got no sleep that night, and my mom and my aunt came back the next morning shocked, asking what we had done. But I was just happy to be alive and that my mom was home again. The worst part of the whole thing was that when she got home, her dad had sold all of her belongings. I mean everything, her bed, her dresser, her television, it was all gone. It was just an empty room. He is clean now, but I still hate him. Story 7. Back in the early 1990s, I worked as a night auditor for a small motel in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I was a young mother and worked nights while my husband worked days. Occasionally, my husband would stop by and check on me. It was a brutal schedule, and I truly do not know how I managed on only a couple of hours of sleep each day. My job was to perform a daily audit on the rooms and money. I also checked people in and out of the hotel. The hours were from midnight to 8 in the morning. One night I had finished my audit and was watching a scary movie on the little television they had behind the front desk. It was winter and very cold. A man came up to the door wearing a ski mask. For a second I thought it was my husband, so I smiled, but he came up to the front desk and asked me why I had smiled at him. I knew right then I was in trouble. He waved a large knife at me and told me to turn around. I felt the most fear then, certain I was going to die. He hopped over the front desk, cut one of the phone lines, and took the money. I had my coat and purse back there, and he took those as well. As he left, he said, "I have your purse. I know where you live now." I stayed hunched in the corner behind the front desk as he left. Then I realized he had only cut the handset to one phone and the main line on another. So I took the handset from one phone and attached it to another where he had not cut the main line. I dialed 911 and got an operator on the line. Just as I was about to talk, the man came back. Apparently he had dropped his knife behind the desk. I saw it on the floor as he came around. I picked it up thinking, can I stab him? We stood there facing each other, me in my uniform and this big man in a thick ski jacket. He demanded I give him the knife. I thought that if I tried to stab him, I would lose, and he would kill me, so I gave him the knife. He took it and hit me over the head with the handle a couple of times and then left. The police soon came, and I recounted my story. As far as I know, he was never caught. The place I worked for let me have one day off, but when I needed more time due to head injuries, they fired me. It turned out they had been robbed a few times before, but had never put in proper security. I took them to court for lost wages and I won. About a year later, maybe less, I saw on the news that a night auditor at the same hotel had been kidnapped, attacked, and left for dead. They caught that man, and he is now in prison. I am literally shaking as I type this. It has been so long, but I rarely talk about it, or I just laugh it off like it was nothing. But obviously it still affects me. It was the scariest night of my life. The hotel, when I worked there, was called Econo Lodge, but they changed the name soon after I left DeForest Lodge. So when the story about the kidnapped clerk came on the news, I did not immediately realize it was the same motel until they showed a photo of it. Then I knew, and it terrified me. Story 8. My father was barely in my life, but the little time he was, he caused me deep harm. I remember my mother telling me to run when he came home angry or drunk, to lock my bedroom door and turn on the television. I could hear him screaming, breaking things, beating up my mother, banging on my door, trying to break in. The police would come, my mother would cry, and he would be back that same night or the next morning and repeat it all again. Sometimes she could not protect me and I would be involved, used as a punching bag and thrown around like a rag doll. He would tear my mother's clothes and assault her in front of me. He always managed to be released because he had friends who were police officers. One night I woke up and heard my mother crying, and when I opened the front door that led to the apartment stairs, I saw her bleeding with her shirt ripped off. He came up the stairs, and I remember saying something before he struck me so hard my head hit the coffee table. The following days remain a blur, with only flashes of the judge granting him weekend custody and my tears each time I was forced to go with him. In public, he could seem like an entirely different person, sometimes even at home. But then, without warning, everything would change. Eventually, he stopped coming for me when I was still very young, but the damage was already done. I remember his recklessness, his addictions, his instability, and the fear he carried with him wherever he went. He was dangerous to everyone around him, especially to those who trusted him the most. Story 9. I was about 14 or 15 years old. School had just ended, so the bus was packed with students. We were a couple of stops away from where everyone usually boarded when a man wearing a huge jacket, a hood, and a mask got on. It was the middle of a heat wave, so it was already very suspicious. He stormed upstairs past me and my friends, threw down a huge bag, screamed, "This is a bomb," and ran off the bus. It took everyone a few seconds to process what had just happened, and then panic broke out. Everyone rushed downstairs trying to escape, but the doors were locked. I remember a large man punching the glass door open as if it were nothing, and people dragging themselves through it. When I got there, I hit the emergency release to make it easier to jump out. Once we were outside, we sprinted at least 500 meters down the road and crouched down, waiting for the explosion. But nothing happened. It was a hoax. Later, we learned that the man responsible was a former student from my school who had been expelled. Story 10. I was walking through campus after a night class around 9 or 9:30 in the evening. It was a very large campus, and at that hour it was mostly empty. The shuttle I needed was at the opposite end, so it was a long walk. At one point, I was walking through a swampy area with a raised boardwalk. Ahead of me were two girls walking together, and I saw them reach the end and enter a building. As I approached the end of the boardwalk, a man suddenly appeared from the woods. He grabbed my hand and began telling me how beautiful I was, asking my name, what year I was in university, what I was doing that night, and where I lived. When I asked why he wanted to know, he said he was taking a survey. I was in shock, barely processing that he was even touching me. His questions sounded rehearsed, rushed, and completely unnatural, and his presence gave off such an unsettling feeling that it terrified me. It was dark, I was alone, and I felt trapped. Thankfully, within a minute or two, another man walked out of the building, and I used that chance to pull my hand away and tell the stranger I had to go. I walked as fast as I could toward my shuttle, shaking the whole time and constantly looking back. Something about him was deeply wrong, and I was convinced that if no one had appeared when they did, something terrible would have happened. The detail that unsettled me most was that he had ignored the two girls ahead of me and chose to target someone walking alone. Story 11. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived in a townhome without a yard in a nice area of town. We knew we would be buying a house soon, so we went ahead and got our first puppy. I am a morning person, while my husband is not, so I would usually get up around 5 in the morning and take the puppy out to the little patch of grass across the street from our townhome, still inside the entire complex. I had been doing this for several months with no problems. One morning, while waiting for the puppy, an old Ford van, beat up and with no windows, slowly drove by and went behind another building. A few minutes later, as I was getting ready to cross the street and go back inside, the van came back up the road to where I was about to cross, stopped in the middle of the road, and turned off its lights. I waved for them to drive on, and at that point, both doors of the van started to open. All I remember was seeing someone begin to get out before both the dog and I felt the undeniable urge to run across the street and inside as fast as possible. Once we were inside, the van sped off and disappeared. The creepiest part of the whole thing was when I went upstairs to wake my husband, only to find him in the middle of a dream where I had been kidnapped. To this day, I refuse to go outside running or walking alone, even on our quiet country roads. Big old vans still terrify me. Story 12. I was trying to take my girlfriend to the hospital because we thought she had appendicitis. It was around 12:30 in the morning on a Sunday in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is a very rough area. We were only 2 streets away from where we lived when we came across a street racing style car with neon lights on the rims pulled halfway into the road. I stopped and waited for it to move, but it did not. I pulled around it and kept going, but the car accelerated and cut me off around a bend, then slowed down and would not let me pass. A second car pulled up on the right, and a third pulled up on the left. At that point, we were boxed in. A young man wearing a white tank top and khaki shorts got out of the car holding a pistol. Someone else handed him a blue bandana, and he started walking toward us. That was when I realized this was too many people for a simple robbery, and that the bandana probably meant it was a gang initiation. I threw the car in reverse and bumped into a fourth car behind us, which I had not seen because I was focused on the man with the gun. I threw it into drive and tried to squeeze past the car on the left and the front car when the man started shooting. He fired 3 shots, but thankfully none hit us. At this point, we were on a back road near a 4-way intersection with a traffic light across from a shopping center with a 24-hour grocery store. I sped through the red light intending to get to the store and ask for help. Before I could make it across, we were struck on the passenger side by a completely unrelated vehicle going 55 miles per hour. Our car spun out, ended up on the side of the road, and was totaled. The men in the other cars fled once other people were involved. I suffered a traumatic brain injury and whiplash from the crash and was paranoid for a very long time afterward. My girlfriend ended up mostly okay, with bruised ribs and whiplash as well. Story 13. When I was a third key at GameStop, a man came in as soon as the store opened. Typically, only one person was there to open, and another employee would not arrive until 1 or 2 in the afternoon. At the time, corporate was really encouraging us to use new tablets to sell games from the website and show trailers and videos. This man started asking me about a game called Dragon's Crown, which was known for highly serialized visuals. He kept insisting on watching gameplay videos, and I grew more uncomfortable by the minute. After about 10 minutes, he looked at me and said, "I just love women's bodies. I love them so much. Are you married?" I said yes. He replied, "That is too bad. I would do disgusting things to you. You are so attractive." He spoke in a low, quiet voice, almost a whisper. At that point, I was in full panic mode, holding the phone in my hand ready to dial 911. After a few more disturbing comments, he simply left the store. I do not know if he just enjoyed frightening women or what, but I was 100% sure he was going to assault me that morning. It has been almost 4 years and my skin still crawls when I think about his voice. Story 14. I left work one day and a stranger suddenly got into my car and made me drive him to a drive-through liquor store. He went inside while I sat there, ready to speed off, but before I could leave, he sprinted back and jumped into my car again. Now he had a brown paper bag with him. He told me to drive and said he would give me directions. At that moment, all I could think was that this was how people ended up dead or worse. As I drove, he pulled out of the bag a pipe, a torch lighter, and methamphetamine, then proceeded to use it in the passenger seat of my car. Eventually, he directed me to a rundown house in a bad part of town and asked me to get out and knock on the door to see if anyone was home. I pretended that my car door was jammed and would not unlock, telling him I could not. He got out and walked toward the house. The moment he was far enough away, I slammed on the gas and sped off, tires squealing. I had no idea where I was and just kept driving until I finally recognized the area. It was by far the most terrified I have ever been. Story 15. I was out with 2 girlfriends at a bar when we met a woman a bit older than us. We talked for a while, and when last call was announced, she said she and her friends were going to an after-hours club and invited us. After discussing it, we agreed to go. Her friends were 2 younger men who did not drink, and one of them drove. We all went to the club, had a great time dancing, and eventually decided it was time to leave. The driver began taking us to our car, but instead he turned into a private parking garage. We started yelling at him, and he told the garage attendant to close the door behind us. The attendant did as he was told, so we began shouting for him to open it. The large Jamaican attendant began yelling at the driver, clearly sensing the danger of what was happening. The 2 men started yelling in their own language, then got out and began attacking the attendant. I bolted from the back seat, lifted the heavy garage door about 3 feet, and squeezed under it in my heels. One of my friends followed, and we ran 2 blocks away, hiding in an alley. From our hiding spot, we saw the men's black SUV creeping down the street, but then realized it was our other friend driving it. She had managed to open the garage door fully, steal their SUV, and get away. The older woman was in the back seat, panicking. Suddenly, we had become the kidnappers. My friend drove the SUV across town, parked a few blocks from her own car, and the 3 of us got out. The older woman ran off. We walked to our car feeling strangely invincible for 3 women who had almost been trafficked. Still, we only felt safe once we were over the bridge and away from that place. Story 16. All through high school, there was a kid named Charles. Charles was strange. He loved guns, loved talking about military technology, and loved showing off his knowledge to anyone who would listen. He bragged about killing animals, not just hunting, but killing birds in his backyard, which was very unsettling since we lived in the suburbs. He also frequently made sarcastic or ironic comments about how great Nazis were, along with racist and anti-Semitic remarks. Unfortunately, Charles had several classes with me and often sat next to me. I was genuinely terrified of him and thought he might one day attack the school. To avoid being on his bad side, my friends and I would humor him whenever we could not escape his presence. During senior year, Charles began selling drugs, mainly marijuana, and he worked at a local hookah lounge that was popular with teenagers. My friends and I did not know this, and one night we ended up at that same lounge. Charles was working and sat down with us, forcing his way into the conversation, talking about the drugs he sold and the guns he kept in his car. Then he started telling us about a nearby trap house he wanted to take us to, presumably to show off his lifestyle. I excused myself to the bathroom, hoping he would leave, but my friend Evan, too afraid to say no, agreed to go with him. When I came back, they were heading out, and Evan gave me a desperate look, so I followed. We were convinced Charles was going to harm us. I literally kept my hand on my seatbelt and the car door, ready to escape if necessary. He drove us to a shady apartment complex, and by then we thought he would either rob us or worse. We followed him inside, still too scared to run, and it was a typical trap house with dealers, people smoking, and weapons lying around. Charles seemed out of place but acted like he belonged, showing us his drugs and guns. Then, without incident, we left and he drove us back to the lounge. Still, I was certain that night would be our last. After that, we avoided him completely until graduation. I have not heard about him since, and that was years ago. Story 17. There are many examples, but in general, the worst moments were when my father's abuse turned on me. I had seen it with my mother, brother, and stepmother, but I was too young to fully understand and learned that if I stayed quiet, I would be fine. That changed once I was old enough to disagree with him about things like vaccines, eating meat, or leaving the house except for school. Then he began using the same tactics he had on the others. He never hit us directly, but he would trap one of us in a room and scream for hours. He would punch the wall next to our heads to make us flinch and threaten to throw us out of an upper floor window. Since he was often using drugs, he was completely unpredictable. One moment stands out clearly. I had to quit university because of mental health issues, and he came to pick me up. For the entire 3-hour motorway drive, he screamed at me for wasting his time, throwing my life away, failing to live up to his standards, and not appreciating him. He yelled at me to stop crying and blamed me for the fact that he had no drugs that day, since he had to spend his money on fuel. He slammed the dashboard and acted like he would ram into other cars just to teach me a lesson. On motorways and bridges, I thought about jumping out of the car, but I knew he would force me back inside and make it worse. The only other time I have been that scared of someone was with my current partner, though he is not abusive. He has post-traumatic stress from a terrible event, and doctors once gave him a new medication. That night, when I looked into his eyes, it was as if I was looking at my father again. Unpredictable, detached, and without empathy. He did not react logically or normally. The next day, he was horrified at what he had said and done. Thankfully, it never happened again, and I trust him fully, but that night he terrified me. I have faced bullies, walked through dangerous areas, and stood up to harassment, but nothing scares me more than people who are unpredictable and not fully aware of their actions. Story 18. When I was very young, I went to get ice cream with our neighbors, who had 2 daughters I grew up with. The car was crowded, so I ended up sitting on their uncle's lap in the back seat. I remember feeling uneasy and soon became so sick that I asked to be taken home right away. Later, I found out that this man had been harming children in the neighborhood, including my 2 friends. About a year later, during a beach picnic with family and friends, I was about to step down toward the sand when a stranger suddenly grabbed my wrist and pulled me close. At first, it seemed like a harmless gesture, but then he began leading me toward the back of an open van. I tried to scream, and he covered my mouth with one hand, which gave me more freedom to thrash until he finally dropped me. I ran faster than I thought possible to get to my dad, but by the time I reached him, the man had sped away. Years later, on the night before my birthday, I was sitting on a tram around midnight, listening to music and admiring the city lights, when a man suddenly grabbed me from behind, around the head and neck. Sitting at the front of the tram behind the driver's compartment, I saw our reflection as he moved his hand across my neck as though he were cutting it. I yelled. He let go, and then he sat back down in his seat with a satisfied look on his face. It was one of the most bizarre and frightening encounters I have ever had. Story 19. About 10 years ago, I was seeing a girl I had known for quite a while. One night, around 3 a.m, she called me crying and begged me to come get her because she was at a stranger's house after a party and was afraid of the men there. She gave me the address, and I got up, drove over, and walked toward the front door. Just as I was approaching, she came running out, shouting for me to get back in my truck. Still half asleep and confused, I hesitated. Within seconds, a man came strutting out with a shotgun pointed straight at my face. I froze in shock, and then one of his friends, who happened to also be my friend, came running out, yelling that I was fine and not a police officer. The man lowered the gun, and I quickly got back into my truck and drove away. On the way home, the girl told me that the man thought she had called the police and had been ready to shoot me the moment I pulled up. She had run out to warn me just in time. I came within seconds of being killed by a man high on drugs. Story 20. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was walking home from school. It was a good 20 to 30-minute walk, and by the time I reached my neighborhood, I saw a tall man walking toward me a few blocks ahead on the opposite side of the street. Suddenly, he crossed over to my side. I stepped down into the gutter to let him pass, but then he did the same. We were still a block apart. I stepped back onto the sidewalk, and a few steps later, he copied me again. I was panicking inside. He looked suspicious, and I almost turned into a driveway to pretend I was unlocking a house. But I froze. We were only a few steps away when I stepped aside again, and he passed without a word. The moment he did, I ran home as fast as I could. I looked back once and saw that he had stopped and was staring at me. When I got home, I called my parents at work to tell them, then turned on the television. On the local news, there he was, a breaking story about an escaped convict. I called the police and told them what I had seen, and they caught him about 30 minutes later, just a few blocks away. After that, I stopped walking and started riding my bike to school. Story 21. When I was in 10th grade, I was part of a co-ed sport. On the day of a match, our team decided to carpool instead of riding the bus. For context, an older teammate had once asked me out. I said no, and afterward he acted strange, even telling people I had said yes and that we were dating. That day, the match was about 45 minutes away, straight down the expressway. I ended up riding with him, another boy, and another girl because there was no space elsewhere, and I did not yet have my license or was not allowed to drive that far. After the match, we were supposed to go straight back to school, as the coach had made clear. My stepdad was waiting for me at the agreed time, and it was already dark when we left. Out of nowhere, the boy decided to take the girl home first, claiming it was on the way, even though he had said earlier that I would be dropped off first. Despite me saying I needed to get back immediately because someone was waiting, he ignored me. I texted my mom telling her I had no choice. She called, upset I was late, and I told her we were just dropping off the girl. He overheard everything, my anxious phone calls and my mom's frustration. Still, after dropping her off, he then insisted on taking the other boy home too, again refusing my requests. By the time I finally got back to school, we were an hour and a half late. It was pitch black, and I had no idea where we had been. I barely even knew him. And looking back, I realized how much power he had in that moment, that he could have taken me anywhere, and I might not have made it home. At the time, all I could think about was how much trouble I was in for being late. When I finally got back, my stepdad was quiet, not angry. But when we got home, my mom started yelling at me. I cried, telling her I could not stop him from refusing to take me back. When she finally heard me say, "There was nothing I could do. He wouldn't take me back," she froze and stopped yelling. For the first time, she backed down, and I think it was because she realized how dangerous the situation had been before I did. He did not stay on the team much longer, and I am fairly sure my mom talked to my coach, who did not tolerate that kind of behavior. Story 22. When I was about 17 years old, I was waiting for the last bus home from a friend's place. It was around midnight, dark and quiet, and I was listening to music. In the distance, I saw a man walking toward me. At first, I felt safer, thinking I was not alone anymore. But then I had this gut feeling that screamed the opposite, that I was in danger. Usually I am paranoid, but my instincts rarely alarm me without reason. This time they were telling me clearly, "Stop listening to music, do not turn your back, keep an eye on him, you are not safe." The man, probably in his mid-40s, came closer and said something. I did not hear him because of the music, so he repeated it, now angry. He asked what time the bus was coming. My instincts told me to lie, so I said 5 minutes, even though it was really 10. For a split second, his face changed, like he was unsettled. Then he quickly walked past the bus stop. My gut told me not to turn my back, so I kept watching. I assumed he was just going to the next stop, but when the bus finally arrived, he never got on. It was one of the strangest experiences of my life, and I am still convinced my instincts were right, that he had bad intentions and that lying saved me from something dangerous. Story 23. I had a friend whose partner at first seemed like a really nice guy. He was supportive of her and even of the people who worked for her. But as her friend, she began to confide in me about some of his darker sides. He had hit her, and when they briefly broke up because of it, he cheated on her. She told me that whenever he drank, he became a completely different person, and she had asked him to stop drinking altogether. They had been together for a long time, and as they began thinking seriously about marriage and children, she realized she could not deal with his lying, cheating, and drinking. She decided she could not marry him and broke up with him. One evening, we went out with friends to a pub we rarely visited for safety reasons. He got drunk elsewhere and called, threatening that he was coming to get us. In his culture, since they had been together for so long, she was practically considered his wife, even without marriage. Men in the city viewed her as his property, and breaking up with him was not seen as acceptable. To them, if she saw another man, it was cheating, even though men could cheat without consequence. People who saw her at the pub told him where we were. He turned up with a machete and attacked her date, first striking with his hand before drawing the weapon, causing serious damage to the man's ear. Her date and the rest of our friends ran faster than I had ever seen anyone run. When he could not reach her new partner, he attacked her car. When we tried talking to him, he threatened me with the machete. My friend pepper sprayed him to stop him, which affected me too. When the police arrived, my friend got in trouble for using pepper spray, while no charges were brought against her ex. Story 24. I live in a crowded city that is not ideal for running, so a few years ago, I would go running in the upper part of town. My neighborhood is on a hill, and the higher you go, the closer you get to wooded areas with fewer houses. It was quiet there, and I liked it because I could run in the street without many cars passing by. One day I was walking to catch my breath when my boyfriend called during his lunch break. I had headphones in and my phone at my side, so it was not obvious that I was on a call. A car slowly pulled up next to me, and there was no one else outside. The driver rolled down his window, and I quickly raised my phone to my ear and said to my boyfriend, "Just 1 second. I am almost home from my run." The man looked around, mumbled, "Are you okay?" and then seemed thrown off as though he had not expected me to be speaking to someone. I said yes, turned back, and went downhill toward more populated areas, eventually running home. In the same area one evening in the fall, I was walking my dog with my boyfriend after dinner, so it was already getting dark. A man appeared wearing sunglasses and a bandana over his face, dragging a baseball bat along the ground. He walked up to us, and my boyfriend tried to casually steer us away. The man asked if we knew where a specific street was, which was strange because it was only a block away. His covered face and the bat made the situation even more suspicious. To make matters worse, my dog, wanting affection, kept pulling toward him, making it harder for us to slip away unnoticed. Story 25. I was walking on a well-groomed, well-traveled trail with my Chihuahua around 3 in the afternoon. I noticed a car parked nearby in a long parking lot next to a school field used for lacrosse. I smiled to myself, thinking they were there for a geocache that had stumped my husband and me many times before. I crossed the street to continue the trail past their location. At that point, the trail went straight along the parking lot before heading into the woods, and it also split, circling a large hill with forest on both sides. Even though it was a suburban area, once behind the hill, you were completely secluded. As I passed the car, it pulled forward and parked right where the trail entered the woods, and I saw the driver get out. I thought it odd but kept going, heading behind the hill. Soon after, my dog started growling and looking behind us. I turned around and saw the man just feet away, which meant he must have run through the woods to catch up. I ripped out my earbuds, gripped my phone, and snapped, "What?" in my angriest voice. He froze, then in broken English asked if there was a fishing lake nearby to bring his kids to. Shocked, I stupidly pointed toward a large natural area. He then asked me to show him on a map, gesturing toward his car, which had been moved again. Since I knew he had been driving, that meant someone else had switched into the driver's seat. I told him no, and we stared at each other in silence. He stepped toward me. I stepped back, and we stood off until he finally turned and left. I sprinted faster than I ever had to get back into public view. I called the police as soon as I got home, and they took my story seriously. They even cut trees to improve visibility where the trail entered the woods. The officers told me it seemed I had been watched before, that they might have been waiting for me to get out of sight, and possibly had seen me walking that trail regularly. Ladies, do not wear earbuds when walking alone, and always be aware of your surroundings. Story 26. I was parked on a one-way street about 10 meters long, in the middle of the night, waiting to pick up a friend. Another car pulled up behind me, so I moved to the side and apologized for blocking the way. Instead of passing, the car pulled in front, blocking my exit. A huge man got out, shouting in a booming voice as he charged at my car. I panicked, threw it into reverse, and tried to back away, but I knew there was a wall behind me. He reached my car, slammed his fist through the passenger window, and I was terrified. I shifted into first gear and accelerated toward the small gap between his car and a brick wall. The only problem was that he had left his door wide open. I drove straight through it, tearing the door clean off, and it stayed on my hood for about 20 meters. I kept driving, told my friend not to come outside, and called the police. I reported a collision but said there was no way I was staying at the scene. My car was totaled, though I managed to get it home. The next day the police told me they did not believe my story. I have no idea what they thought had happened, but that was when I lost faith in them. Story 27. When I first moved to a new city, I lived with two strangers I had found through a Craigslist ad. The apartment was beautiful, affordable, and in a good neighborhood. The woman and I got along well, but the man clearly had problems. He was intelligent and pursuing a doctorate in philosophy, but he lived like a slob, grew mushrooms in plastic tubs in his room, and left the place a mess. He had a framed news article about September 11th in the entryway, which made us uncomfortable, and he threw a fit when we asked him to move it. He often had angry outbursts, once even throwing small appliances off the fire escape. Every few weeks he would announce plans to move out, only to change his mind later. Eventually the woman and I confronted him and said for our safety, we needed him to actually move out as he had threatened, or we would contact the landlady. When I mentioned calling the police, he completely lost it, shaking, stammering, begging us not to do that. He said he would move out within 3 days if we promised in writing never to contact the police, which to me was a major red flag that he had a violent past. A few days later, his parents came to help him move. When I went to the kitchen, they immediately yelled at me for being in the way. They were clearly upset and seemed to have been told a different story. I explained I was just grabbing breakfast. Suddenly, his mother screamed accusations at me, claiming I was blocking her, bumping into her, trying to trip her, and shoving her, all completely false. Within moments, all three of them were screaming at me, and his father was just inches from my face, purple with rage. I was certain he would hit me. I retreated to my room and stayed there until they were finally gone. Story 28. When I was 10 years old, I was walking to the corner store with my 5-year-old brother when a man in a truck stopped in the middle of the street and told me to come to his door. I immediately said no. He then pointed a gun at me and said, "Yes, I have a gun. Come here." I walked to the driver's side while keeping my hands behind my back to signal my brother to keep walking. I had already told him before approaching to continue toward the store. The man asked me strange questions like, "Do you hate your family? Do you want to run away? Have you ever wanted to do whatever you want?" I placated him with my answers to avoid angering him. He then said, "I am going to pull into the driveway, turn the truck around, and you are going to get in." I said, "Okay," but as soon as he turned into the driveway, I ran for the store. My little brother, only 5 years old, was waiting just behind me. So I scooped him up, threw him over my shoulder, and sprinted as fast as I could to the corner store. The old man who ran the store, a family friend, called the police and then pulled out the largest handgun I had ever seen from behind the counter. He asked me to describe the truck and then left us in the store with his wife. The police came, but the man was never found. Later in life, I have had other terrifying encounters, including having a shotgun pointed at my face for being Mexican, walking in on a drug deal in a sketchy bathroom, and having a pistol aimed at me while they decided if I should be allowed to leave, and being escorted to my truck while threatened. But nothing compared to being 10 years old, having an adult talk to me in such a disturbing way, and having to protect my younger brother. That was the scariest encounter I have ever had with another human. Story 29. When I was about 14 years old, I had to stay after school one Friday for Friday night school, which was a 2-hour detention for students who had received too many pink slips. I had been to a couple before and always walked home afterward without issue, but this day was different. On my way home, I reached a Walgreens. Across from it, though slightly at an angle, was another street. I noticed a car waiting at the stop sign, but I kept walking, assuming they would yield since I was on the sidewalk. Instead, they drove at me honking as if I was in the wrong, and then pulled into the lot. 3 girls, a couple of years older than me, jumped out and started screaming that I needed to apologize. They called me names and threatened to beat me up if I did not say sorry. Terrified, I froze. One girl came right up to me yelling and punched me hard in the side of the head while the other 2 cheered her on. Their mother sat in the car, trying to get them to leave me alone. The girl hit me a few more times before her sister suddenly asked, "Wait, how old are you?" The girl stopped, looked at me, saw my pink cheetah print backpack and school hoodie, and seemed to decide I was too young. They got back in the car and drove off. I stood there frozen, crying, humiliated, and terrified. It was one of the worst experiences of my childhood, leaving me shaken and feeling powerless, even though I had done nothing wrong. Story 30. This happened recently. I became friends with a man who had served 2 tours in Iraq. He had post-traumatic stress disorder, though he hid it well, and we often drank together. One night, while watching the show The Ranch on Netflix, which features a veteran character with post-traumatic stress, things took a dark turn. We were drunk, and before the episode began, he started talking about what had damaged him. He described in detail the horrors he faced, how children would sometimes be used to stop convoys as traps, forcing him to make terrible decisions to save his squad. As the episode played, showing a character having a severe breakdown, my friend completely lost control. He jumped out of his chair, eyes wide with panic, unable to recognize any of us. He hyperventilated, crouched in the corner in a fighting stance, and seemed ready to attack. For about 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity, he was unreachable, not responding to his name, completely consumed by the episode in his mind. By sheer luck, his favorite song played in the background of the show. That moment seemed to ground him. He collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, apologizing over and over. Eventually, he calmed down and asked me, "It happened, didn't it?" It was one of the scariest things I have ever witnessed. I had always respected veterans, especially since many are in my family, but that night gave me a deeper understanding of the invisible weight they carry. It was like something from a movie, but terrifyingly real. Story 31. I was 19 years old and cell phones were barely a thing yet. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was walking home from a night out at a bar with friends, though I had not been drinking. I had to walk about 6 or 7 blocks to reach my house. The road was fairly well lit, and I noticed a car pass me, turn right at an intersection ahead, and then park on the side of the street, not next to any particular building. I was not paying much attention and kept walking. After crossing the intersection and passing a row of buildings, a man suddenly stepped out from between 2 of them and grabbed me. He must have parked, gotten out, and run around to wait for me. There was no one else around. He started dragging me between the buildings toward a parking lot behind them. I was about 100 pounds and only 5 feet tall, so at times my feet left the ground as I kicked and screamed, struggling to stay upright. Luckily, my roommate had given me a pair of brass knuckles, which I always wore when walking alone at night. My hands were in my hoodie pocket when he grabbed me, and I managed to free one arm and swing as hard as I could, punching him in the face with the brass knuckles. I do not know if it really hurt him or just shocked him, but he immediately let go. I ran and he started chasing me, yelling profanities before turning back toward his car. I cut into a neighborhood, running through yards, hiding behind a garage, and then taking a zigzag path home to avoid being followed. When I finally made it inside, my roommate was at work, and I considered calling the police. But I realized I had not gotten a good look at the man, only his car's color. Now in my 30s, after countless true crime shows and podcasts, I know I would try to notice more details or collect evidence. But at the time, all I could do was survive. I am certain his intention was to attack me, and it remains one of the scariest moments of my life. Story 32. This incident happened in the 1990s in a country known for its safety, where it was common to accept rides from strangers along the main street. I was with friends outside a teen club when one of them started talking to some boys who offered a ride down the street. She asked if I wanted to join, and assuming she was also coming along, I agreed. But once I was inside, I realized she wasn't getting in. The boys drove off, passing the turn for the main street. When I asked why, the driver claimed he would turn back, but the atmosphere quickly changed. They pressured me, crossed boundaries, and kept driving farther away. Only later did I realize they were heading out of town. By the time we stopped, we were already 2 towns away, parked outside a house. Somehow they convinced me to go inside, promising to drive me back. The boy who had touched me earlier got me alone in a bedroom and tried to assault me. I fought back, managed to kick him off, and he locked me inside, enraged. My clothes were torn, bruises forming on my arms and legs. In the room, I saw his driver's license pinned to a board, realizing he had given me a fake name earlier. I could hear him outside screaming that he would kill me and that he was getting his father's shotgun. I knew I could not wait. Using a pen, I picked the lock, slipped into the living room, grabbed car keys I saw on a counter, and ran for the door. I tried starting the car but realized I could not get it moving properly. The boy whose car it was bargained with me, saying he would drive me back into town if I gave him the keys, and I agreed only on the condition that I sit in the front seat. On the ride back, the failed attacker sat in the back, complaining that the club was closed and he could not find another girl. They dropped me outside the empty club, far from home and past curfew. In hindsight, I should have gone straight to the nearby police station and taken the license. But at the time, I was only afraid of getting in trouble with my parents. Luckily, I spotted my ex-boyfriend's car, flagged him down, and told him everything. He was furious and said he was going back into town to find those boys. I never saw them again and do not know what happened after, but that night left me shaken for years. Story 33. I was 16 years old when I left Switzerland to learn English in Vancouver. One morning around 6:30, I took the Sky train to go to the mall because I had lost my wallet the day before. I was listening to music when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw a tall man about 30 years old with bleached hair, wearing a snake-patterned shirt, white pants, flashy snakeskin shoes, and heavy gold jewelry. I thought nothing of it. This was Vancouver, so I said hello. He complimented my hair, I thanked him, and turned back around. When I got off the train, he followed me and started talking. He was energetic and odd, but not aggressive, so I kept walking, assuming he would leave. When I arrived at the mall, I realized the doors would not open until 9. It was only 7, nothing else was open, and he would not go away. He suggested going for a walk nearby, and for some reason I agreed, not wanting to offend him. He found a red balloon and gave it to me, which felt unsettling. Then, while we passed a parking lot, he asked if I had ever stolen a car. When I said no, he proceeded to explain how. I asked how he knew, and he said he had just gotten out of prison. That was why he was out so early. Panic set in. I nervously asked what he had done, hoping it was not murder or assault, and he said he stole a car at a party and hit someone. Then he flexed his arms to show how strong he was. By the time the mall opened, I hurried back, spoke to the first person I saw, and when the man looked away, I ran. I never found my wallet, nor did I ever see him again. Looking back, anything could have happened to me. I had no phone, no money, no one around, and no idea how dangerous that situation might have been. Story 34. I was stalked for years by an unknown person. It began in 8th grade when he started calling my house. He acted like someone mysterious from my past but refused to say who he was. Soon it turned disturbing. He would come to my house in the middle of the night and throw rocks at my window. He called repeatedly, and when I picked up, he would say things like, "I saw you today," and then describe exactly what I was wearing, down to the smallest detail. My parents would not change the number or go to the police. Once he even said he had broken into our house. In 7th grade, we actually came home from dinner to find someone inside. He escaped over the back fence, and even though the police came with helicopters, he was never caught. After that, I was so afraid I would walk down the middle of the street so no one could pull me into the bushes. I would ask my brother to check the house every time we came home. My mother finally went to the police after I developed some photos at the drugstore with my best friend. As we flipped through them, there were suddenly explicit pictures of a man's body and pictures of my bed. My friend asked if it was someone we knew, but it was not. Detectives were called, sketches were made, and they even took my journals, but he was never caught. This harassment lasted from 7th grade until my junior year of high school. Even after we moved, the calls continued because we kept the same number. One day while I was home sick, he called again. Furious, I phoned my mother at work, screaming that she had to change the number. She finally did, and that was the end of it. Story 35. In the 1980s, when I was 14 years old, I snuck out of my house late at night to meet my graffiti writer boyfriend. On my way home from the train around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps running up behind me. Smiling, I thought it was my boyfriend surprising me. But instead, it was a stranger who punched me hard in the face and shoved me to the ground. He grabbed me by the hair and began slamming my head against the sidewalk while covering my mouth with his other hand. All I could think was, no, this is not happening. As I felt myself starting to lose consciousness, I knew I had to act quickly. I managed to free one arm and shoved my fingers into his eye. He reflexively pulled his hand off my mouth and I began screaming. A neighbor ran out of his house and the man bolted. I ran too, terrified, because I was 14 and more worried about getting in trouble for sneaking out than anything else. Back in my room, I sat huddled on the floor, heart racing, convinced he would come crashing through my window. In the morning, I snuck out so I would not have to explain the black eyes and bruised face to my parents. Even now, decades later, I flinch when someone comes up unexpectedly behind me. And as a mother now, I shudder to think that if he had managed to knock me out, he could have dragged me under the bridge near our street, and my mother might never have seen me again. Story 36. I was 13 years old, struggling with moderate to severe depression that I never told anyone about. One Friday night, I was invited to a sleepover with 4 other girls. Though I wanted to stay in bed, I decided it would be better than being home with my toxic family. On the way, I stole 3 Xanax pills from my mother's purse at a gas station, something I had done before without her noticing. At my friend's house, everyone seemed unusually quiet. Around 11 at night, one of them locked the door, and they told me they were sneaking out to meet boys at the park. They decided I would have my first kiss. I felt anxious but too scared to object, so I went to the bathroom and swallowed all 3 pills. At the park, we sat under a slide, talking about dating and dares. When it came time, I kissed one of the boys. Afterward, I leaned against a small climbing wall, and that was when I noticed a tall shadow duck behind a bush. He was enormous, easily 6'10", and he crouched watching me. Whether it was the Xanax or sheer terror, I was frozen, staring as he shifted, stood, and then dropped to all 4s, crawling toward me. First slowly, then unnervingly fast. He was about 100 yards away. Just then, my friends, who had already started walking away, called out for me. Realizing I was alone, the figure suddenly vanished. I never told anyone because I did not think they would believe me. But I saw him again several more times until I was about 16, and the memory still chills me. Story 37. Back in my college days around 2005, I used to drink quite a bit on weekends and on Thursday nights. One Thursday, while walking home from the bars, I decided to hitchhike the last 3/4 of a mile to my apartment. A white lifted Dodge 3500 pickup stopped, and the driver reached over, opened the door, and let me in. We chatted briefly. He asked where I lived, what my roommates were like, clearly trying to figure out if anyone would expect me home. As we neared my apartment, I told him this was my stop. He looked at me and said firmly, "No, this is not your stop," and hit the lock button on the doors. My stomach dropped as I realized I was about to be kidnapped or worse. As he floored the accelerator through a red light at my apartment's intersection, I unlocked the door, flung it open, and threw myself out, tucking and rolling onto the pavement. He sped off but soon made a U-turn and came back in my direction, swerving as if to hit me. I ducked into bushes until he gave up and drove away. I never got his license plate, and being a drunk college kid, I did not report it. Later that year, I heard of multiple abductions by a man in a white pickup. Some victims were stabbed, one was beaten into a coma, and another was killed. I realized I might have been one of his first targets, and I sometimes wonder if my escape made him bolder. Even now, thinking about it makes me shake.